Buenos dias, amigos. Thank you very much for watching the last video around the truth about owning a 12-year-old Range Rover. Phenomenal response. So I thank each and every one of you for your watch time and your subscription. It's gone through the roof, which is amazing. But I've had a lot of follow-up questions that have come from really about advice on what to look for when buying these vehicles. So I figured there are 5 things that I've looked for when I bought this, or in my search for buying this, that I think I can share with you, and it might help you when you're looking to buy one of these vehicles. So before I get into that, the first thing I think you need to look at is really the purpose of what you're buying these for. Now clearly my purpose, unusually, is to turn this into an overlanding vehicle, which I think I've done. But your purpose might be slightly different. So I also think that determines what type of vehicle you do buy. So if your purpose is to mirror something similar to this, because let's face it, they're phenomenal vehicles. Let's just park all the rhetoric around them, the negativity, shall we say. They are phenomenal vehicles, and until you drive one of these off-road, you haven't appreciated how good they really are. So if your goal is to be able to take a vehicle like this and use it just for road-based use, I think that determines, or whether it's a daily driver, I think that determines where you go next on the 5 things that I'll talk about. Now for me, a couple of key things were I wanted as much luxury as I possibly could and the biggest bang for my pound as I could possibly get. So for me, the Autobiography Black was the ultimate Range Rover for its time. And there are a couple of things that I'll talk about as I go through this that makes it unique. So the first thing I think you need to look at is the age of these vehicles. Now the first ones are 20 years old. Now the reality is, do you know the service history of what's gone on with a vehicle that's 20 years old? Chances are the answer to that is no, you don't. Unless you bought it from a family member, and unless you've got absolutely everything around the service history, I would avoid anything in those first 3 to 6 years. So 03 to 06, to be honest with you, unless you're looking to turn it into an off-roader and you're comfortable with what you're buying. Because let's face it, the cost of those is going to be pretty low. So when considering one of these, my advice to you would be to buy something from 08 to the last model year, which was 12. Because I think then most of the bugs were ironed out of these vehicles. Most of the things that could have gone wrong have gone wrong and been replaced. And you should end up with a pretty good, solid, decent vehicle. So number one, the age of the vehicle, I would look at getting 08 to 12. So that gives you the last of the second facelift models and all of the 9 to 12 third generation facelift models. So age 8 to 12 would be my recommendation. Now the other thing to look at would be cost. So the age of the vehicle being one thing, as you're now looking at 8 to 12, my advice is set a budget. Now you can get a good one from 8 to 12 for 10 grand. You really can. I paid 12 and a half for this. Now that's because it's an Autobiography Black. It's relatively rare. It's very rare actually. And it's absolutely loaded with everything that Land Rover had at that period of time in the parts bin that could get chucked onto this vehicle. That's why I spent more. I also had the service history as well, which is vital in my opinion. So set yourself a budget. Now if it's 10 grand, my advice would be look for one between 8 and 8.5 and hold back some money, because something is going to need fixing. Something is going to need attention. And if your budget is 10 grand and you blow 10 grand on that vehicle and something goes wrong 2 weeks later, you could be in for a whole series of hurt. And I know a lot of people have come up with this advice, and I would recommend it wholeheartedly. My budget was 15k. because that would have been a really good one, and I had set attributes of what I needed for that vehicle, this vehicle. So 15k was my absolute budget, and I needed to buy a car within that. Anything that needed fixing needed to go into that budget. So find your budget, don't go over it, stay under it, but hold some money back. Be that 2 grand, 1,500, 1,000, whatever that might be, based on that vehicle that you look for, hold some money back just in case. Now while we're on that topic, holding money back also to me is important, because unless you've got receipts for any gearbox change, oil change, the first thing I would do with the money that I held back when I got the car, unless I had receipts that showed it had been done within, I don't know, 5,000 miles, is to get an oil and filter change, get a gearbox oil change with the filter, transfer box and diffs. Get rid of all the fluids, so you know pretty much from day one you're starting with a vehicle that has fresh fluids, and from that day forward start to put your own maintenance schedule in place. That would also include things like air filters as well. Check them, if need doing, bin them, get new ones. The other piece of advice I'll give you on this one is use OEM parts or genuine parts wherever you can. High quality oils, high quality filters. Now if you're into the 8 to 12 range, you're really down to 3 engines. That's 3.6 turbo diesel. You're also into the 4.2 supercharged, and you're also into the 4.2 diesel as well. So these are all Jag engines, and they are pretty much bulletproof. Now those engine combinations combined with the gearbox combinations will determine where you go. Now this is a 4.4 twin turbo V8, it's a diesel, and this is married to the 8-speed ZF gearbox. The other models are probably married to a 6-speed ZF gearbox. The 5-litre, which is pretty rare in the UK, is married to a ZF box as well. I cannot remember whether it's a 6 or an 8. I'm pretty sure that the only ones that came with an 8 were the 4.4s. Somebody will correct me down below, somebody knows all this tech. Rob, I'm sure you will know. Now common issues, so the only ones I really know about common issues are with the 4.4 and the 5-litre supercharged. Now the supercharged 5-litre engine, phenomenal as it is going to only get you about 12 miles a gallon, probably 16 to 18 on a run. The 4.4, which is what I have, you can comfortably get 28 to probably mid-30s on a run. It is very, very economical. Now the common problems with these are around about 100 grand, 100,000 miles. The EGR valves begin to fail on these vehicles and the turbos go. Now unless you've got receipts for that, that ends up, the EGRs are about £1,000 to replace. If you end up with turbos that need replacing, remember one is bigger than the other, you're probably looking at a couple of grand for that. So again, if they've not been done and you don't have receipts for them, seriously look at that if you're buying one of these 4.4 turbo diesels. The 5-litre supercharged, which in the UK there aren't that many of them to be honest, had timing chain issues. So again, one consideration would be, has it been done? If it hasn't, then you know you're in for a pretty large bill to have that done. I'm sure there are a lot of independent Land Rover dealers, garages that can fix it for you and have got experience doing it, because a lot of them did fail. But that's just something to consider. So the engine combinations combined with the gearbox combination should be a consideration as well. Now these vehicles came with a whole series of trim options. There's the SE, there's the HSE, there's the Vogue, you've got Westminster, you've got Autobiography, and yes, you've got the Autobiography Black. From the bottom level up, you begin to notice the level of luxury added to those vehicles. So for instance, if you go for the base level vehicle, all of the dash surfaces are plastic. As you begin to go to things like the HSE, Autobiography, you go to Westminster, all of the touch surfaces become leather. And if that's important to you, things like leather door cards instead of plastic, I would go for either an HSE or an autobiography or a Westminster, because you're just raising the level of the quality of the components that are in there. Leather touch surfaces, leather headliner, Alcantara sun visors, all of those optional extras went in those higher level models. So bear that in mind. Go to Wikipedia and all these other websites that would detail the types of trim options that were available in those. Now if your budget doesn't extend to that, the SE model would be a great vehicle to take it overland, purely because you don't need to worry about ripping the leather, those sorts of things, or any of the nicks and things that will go on any of the surfaces. If your purpose is to take it off-road, then an SE model would be good. But my preference is I do still do a lot of driving on the road. So for me, I want as much luxury in this vehicle as I possibly can. Now one thing to think of, and this one is quite important, if you intend to take this off-road, there are very few of these vehicles that actually have a rear locker. Now the Autobiography Black came with a rear locker as standard. And I remember having these discussions with different people, whether it's a Discovery 4 or these or a Range Rover Sport. Very, very few of these vehicles have a rear locker. Now the reason why, and this is, I'm just going to surmise the reason why, is when people bought these vehicles from you and looked at the optional extras and were going down and scrolling down and it said rear locker, and they sat there with the dealer and said, well, what's a rear locker? Because let's face it, most people probably didn't know when they bought this vehicle what a rear locker was, why it was important, why you need it. And when you look at it, an optional extra, I'm guessing £1,500, a lot of people, when they spec these out at new, chose not to have one because they just didn't believe they needed it. And that is why it's so rare to find a Discovery 3 or 4 or any of the different Range Rover models of this age that has a rear locker. Now I know I've got one because the Autobiography Black came with a rear locker. So go under there, cruise around and see if it's in there. I'm sure there's ways you can find out the configuration files in your gap tool as well, whether it's got a rear locker. So if you are looking for the ultimate package to take these things off-road, see if you can find one with a rear locker. They are like hen's teeth. Loads of people have been trying to find them in breakers' yards to see if they actually have them. And they are expensive if you find one, and I don't know if you can retrofit them. I'm sure you could, but I'm sure it's not easy to do. Now clearly service history is vitally important. When I bought this vehicle, I had every single stamp in the logbook. Most of it was from a dealer. Anything that was done outside of when it left warranty or it was not taken into a dealer, I have most of the receipts for the big stuff, the EGR valves. I also had the receipt from the turbos that were replaced as well. So have they replaced gearboxes, because they were notorious for going early on some of these models. Not all of them, but some of them were replaced under warranty. That should be reflected in the service history. So if you can get the service history, my advice would be to get as much information as you can about the history of the vehicle. Now when I was cruising around looking for mine, I had 3 guys actually sort of photocopy or take pictures of the service book and the receipts they had, and they emailed them to me when I was looking for it, just to prove, because they saw it as a major benefit in selling their vehicle. Having a full service history or all the receipts to them was a good selling point. And I think if you do go around the road for looking for these, get as much information as you possibly can. Yeah. Now one piece of advice I can give you, and that's just not to do with these vehicles. If you're watching this video and you've got other vehicles, change the oils regularly. Use high quality OEM genuine filters. Don't skimp and save on a filter. It's just not worth it. You will pay for it. Big time. Get a good high quality air filters, oil filters, gearbox filters, and also pollen filters as well. All of the dusty trails I do, it gets absolutely filthy. So I hope that's been of use to you. Those are my 5 pieces of advice considering buying an L322. And with that, adios amigos, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.